So I needed to sort of temper this. Under what circumstances do you not use an LLM? And I came up with 5, which is it might be too expensive. Like if you can use GPT-4 or Claude Opus for all your inference work, great. But if you've got 1 million messages coming in per day, that would start adding up to probably hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, and that might be rather expensive. Another one might be latency. A lot of you struggled with this in assignment 1, because I said, don't worry about it. If you're running on a PC or you're running on a phone, the compute to run Mistral even, it might take like 2 minutes to get the first token out. That's obviously not acceptable in a whole bunch of circumstances. It may be that resource consumption is impossible. So I'd love to run Mixtral on my laptop, but the Mixtral model is bigger than the 16 gig of RAM that's in my laptop. So I'm kind of out of luck on that one. The 4th one, which I've sort of had little pokes from people talking about, is the idea of data sovereignty. Things like this data can't be sent overseas, so therefore we can't do it. So in Switzerland, for example, if you work in a bank and you have some personal information about your client, personal information, really sensitive stuff like their phone number or their address or their date of birth. I mean, stuff that in Australia we wouldn't blink about handing out. And you as a Swiss banker, I don't know, you take your laptop over the border to France. Sorry, you have just committed a crime that is punishable by prison time. That is how serious the Swiss are about data sovereignty. I'll give you another example of the sovereignty issue where, yes, it does sort of matter, which is Queensland Public Service. They didn't want the data leaving Queensland. And even if it was an open source model hosted in New South Wales, that would still be a problem because it's simply the data leaving. So with QPS, that's basically legislative. Even if an individual public servant says, in this situation, this is really stupid, it's tough luck. The state government rules say public service isn't allowed to do that. Yeah, so the question is sort of, why do we even bother having data sovereignty when we violate it all the time? Like health data, people will email it via Gmail or send conversations over WeChat where we absolutely know for a fact that the CCP has access to that information. Yeah, why do we even bother half the time? And I suppose that's actually the argument against this design principle, that nobody cares, so why does it matter? Yeah, so summarising, yeah, the whole thing makes no sense at all, some of the data sovereignty laws that we see, and yet it's also simultaneously a giant issue, as like GDPR for German companies is. I have a question from online, which was, will we be taught in the course how to actually create a small language model which can work on our laptops? Yes, that was last week's lecture on things like knowledge distillation and pruning and quantization, and also that's going to be part of assignment 2, is you'll be making a smaller model and reporting on how well it works. And last possibility is when you need explainability, which crops up in GDPR, it crops up in Californian insurance, it crops up in the PIPL in China. Solutions to these, well, if you have a problem with inference cost or latency or resource consumption, then you're going to need to build a smaller model. And if data sovereignty is a problem, then you're going to have to host it yourself, which probably means you need a smaller model. And if you need explainability, then you probably need a super tiny model. And the biggest problem you're going to face then is getting training data. And you might have noticed a certain theme coming through a lot of this. The bit of lesson says, if you have more data, you're fine. This one didn't really have that theme at all. The prompting versus fine tuning is, if you've got a model that's already been trained with vast amounts of data, you're kind of okay. Number 4 is, if you can't use an LLM, you're going to need a lot of training data.